I think we should get started if that's okay. Good
Yeah, great.
afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us for another webinar in the Red into Black series. I'm Stephen Michelle, I'm the Director of PCI Partners, and today we've got joining us Bruce Bilson, who is the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman. You're welcome to ask questions of Bruce at the end of the presentation that we've got today, and we'll try and keep it to the half an hour as we always do. But anyway, to give you a bit of an introduction on Bruce, Bruce commenced his role as the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman in March 2021. So, a fairly short period of time, Bruce. Bruce brings experience and knowledge to the role of Ombudsman and an understanding of the issues facing small business, having started his own advisory business in 2016. Bruce's political career spans 30 years, including his role as Cabinet Minister for Small Business between 2013 and 2015. And during this period of time, Bruce was instrumental in establishing this particular office and the passing of complex legislation involved in actually establishing the organisation. Bruce has shown his dedication to small business through various board appointments, including the Franchise Council of Australia, Deakin University Business School, and Australian Property Institute, and more recently through his appointment as Administrator for the City of Whittlesea. So welcome, Bruce. Thank you for joining us today, and I think this will be a very interesting discussion that we're going to have. So firstly, I suppose the question is, who are you?
Well, I'm not here for eye candy's sake, that's for sure. So
Yeah.
but it's great to be with you and your audience, Steve. And I saw Ian McKenzie popped up in the Q&A, and good to be with you all. Couple of things I should just mention. Also, a former retailer in Mornington. That was a business that I owned with my wife, and that was always character building. Great contraceptive, owning a business with your wife, let me say. But that was fun. And also a founding director of Judo Bank when we were trying to shake up the banking sector with a bit of more responsive finance for SMEs. What I am doing now is having to abandon all of those commercial and business interests and other roles. I take on a single role now as the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman. It is quite a mouthful. Its acronym is ASBEFIO. The only virtuous thing is it sounds just as good after a few red wines as it did beforehand. And as a teetotaler, it always sounds fine to me. But it's a role and an agency that I actually set up, never imagining I would be in it. And it was really there to be an ally for small and family businesses. When I was the Cabinet Minister for Small Business, it was very clear to me that a lot of government agencies in particular were doing things for and to small businesses without a really good insight on what the field evidence was, what enterprising men and women were actually experiencing, and how their policy ideas and programs would land in the hands of real people running real businesses. So I was very keen to get better insights to help formulate policy, and thought we needed a channel where it didn't matter whether you were ACMA, the Communication Media Authority, Treasury, or someone over in defence wanting to engage more effectively with small business. We thought we needed to have an ally set up to enable that every day, not just when someone decided they would have a conversation with small business. It became particularly important, Steve, an audience for red tape and regulatory impositions. Too often I saw a mindset that seemed to think a small business was a shrink-wrapped version of a bigger business. And, well, let's use my experience in the financial services space. When we were setting up Judo, we had the same compliance obligations as NAB. There were more people in compliance roles in, Westpac when it had that anti-money laundering challenge than we had in our entire organisation, yet we still needed to meet those same regulatory requirements. So this idea of right-sizing regulation and understanding the imposition being asked on small business was very real. Another dimension of it, which is now in the legislation, is a dispute resolution function. This is where often there's power imbalance between a big business and a small business, and sometimes bigger enterprises throw their muscle around because they can, and that can often be really quite punishing for small businesses. We offer a dispute mediation service, a commercial dispute, I suppose, facilitation role, where we bring the parties together, encourage them to remain mutually respectful adults talking to each other rather than a parent-child type relationship where you should be doing this and be bloody grateful you've got this contract with our big firm. We try and cut through that nonsense and try and find a ready path to a resolution that sees the relationships preserved and business gets back to business. So that's a key part of it, and we can touch a bit more on that. And the last one is a champion. You know, you and I and all the people on your call understand what vital contribution enterprising men and women make, creating businesses that give them livelihoods. But, you know, more than half the private sector economy relies upon small business to generate employment and economic activity. And in these periods now, we were talking about jobs growth. 2/3 of the jobs growth tends to come from small business. I thought there needed to be a champion, in addition to me as the cabinet minister, sharing this story, talking up small business, putting wind in its sail and building public appreciation every day. And part of that is an advocacy role. One of the things that the role has is it's got independence protected by being a statutory appointment. While there's no point in me upsetting ministers every day, I can say things that they might not want to hear. And unlike other public servants that would have their ears clipped, I've got a statutory independence that allows me to advocate on behalf of small business and family enterprises, even when it might not be things that people want to hear, but I think are important, are vital to vitality in the sector, and the role's got that freedom as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a fairly wide-ranging role. So, how many people within your office?
Yeah, well, we've got 36. That's all. It's a small agency.
Yep.
We've just had a couple of extra staff added through the last budget process. I thought we needed more horsepower around data analytics and analysis. A lot of discussion in small business relies heavily on anecdotes, and you often see inquiries and reviews driven by multiple anecdotes, which become anecdata. You know, we use that phrase that, you know, recurring anecdotes are often an insight, but they're not the hard evidence that we need. So I've building out that capacity within the agency to talk about hard evidence, economic impact, really make the case for some of the policy reforms and initiatives that we're advocating for. So that's seen a bit of a bulking up of the team, which is welcome, but it's a skill set that's highly valued, and we're fighting to get the horsepower we need to do our work as well as we can.
And I assume that the pandemic has probably made your office even the more important, I would have thought.
Yeah, it did. We saw quite an uplift in issues, particularly. You know, one of the first things we saw, a lot of people were protecting their cash very early in the pandemic, trying to work out what sort of liquidity they needed to get through a shutdown. They didn't know how long that would be. There was, at that stage, not JobKeeper and other supports in mind. And so a lot of them turned to us when, you know, we've got linen companies that were paid by the delivery for the hotel industry in Sydney. All of a sudden, when there's nothing happening there, they've got no income, yet they had equipment financing obligations on their vehicles. These things would pop up. Payment times blew out as well, Steve. We often championing businesses doing the right thing, and that's paying your bills on time. A lot of businesses, particularly larger businesses with small business suppliers, actually just sat on their hands for a while. We got a bit involved with that. We also administer a number of codes, industry codes. They're kind of sector specific, where there's often an imbalance in market power that can see behaviour not that flash. So we administer dispute mediation codes in the oil industry. You can imagine a couple of refineries and wholesalers and a lot of small business retailers. We do that in the dairy industry as well, where you might have one, in some cases only one milk processor. If you're lucky, you might have 2 or 3 in other areas. You know, really at times challenging good business practices with dairy, with milk producers. Franchising is another one where we've got, you know, that risk of power imbalance. And in those relationships during COVID, sometimes that adult to adult relationship can get a little parent-child, and the smaller businesses can get pushed around. But we do a lot in that space, but we also have a network around us, Steve, that you know of, and I'm sure many on this call know, of state-based small business commissioners. They are important collaborators with us, so we work alongside that. And if it's within one state, because of the Constitution, we'll hand off to them. If it's so, I'm just getting some traffic coming through on my phone. I'm trying to clear that. AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, again, another key collaborator with us. So we handle some of that, but if it's not us, we act as a concierge and make sure it lands in the right place in a warm way for people to get an outcome that they need.
Yeah, look, that's really interesting. And that probably brings us on to what probably a lot of the participants today will probably want to understand a little bit more, and that is, sort of how you can assist. And maybe we should go through maybe some of those key areas that would interest people here today. So let's start maybe with the ATO. What sort of things do you see in terms of those sorts of disputes, and how can you assist with that?
Yeah, well, there's two dimensions to that. One, for your audience, not just disputes, but your insights. I chair the Federal Regulator Agency Group. So that's a chance for me to talk to not just the ATO, the ACCC, Fair Work Ombudsman, and others. I chair that meeting and bring to life the small business experience. So you might see a conversation about STP 2.0 and go, oh, it'll be great, it'll be great. And I'll say, hang on a minute, most small businesses wouldn't even know what you're talking about. The business case to implement it leans pretty heavy to helping government rather than helping the small businesses. And I'm not sure the software companies are ready to go. They'll surface that kind of observation and say, maybe you might want to think about deferring the start date for 6 months because people are pretty COVID focused at the moment and probably don't need another imposition to bust out various components of salaries. Anyway, I'm sure your folks on the call know all about STP 2.0. So for your audience, part of what I do is I interact around those policy questions, around impact, around what the small business experience is, and actually try and have any influence on the way these agencies operate. So we do that in tax. I co-chair the Small Business Tax Stewardship Group, where we have a lot of people come together and talk with the tax office about things they're doing and how it may be impacting, or things they're not doing that we think we should. I mentioned that Financial Regulator Agency Group. I also co-chair, I'm involved on the e-invoicing task force, Champions Adoption Network, and there's a few other things. And even on the shadow economy, I'm involved with the ATO's and Treasury's work on that. So for your audience, if you've got field evidence and practical insights that you think can really add to that work, well, we're there to help bring that to life. The other side of it is when a small business has a dispute with a tax office. We've got a couple of mechanisms, Steve. We've got a very good relationship. I meet with the Deputy Commissioner responsible for small business, I think every fortnight. Occasionally that conversation might be, hey, this case has come to us. I really reckon you should have another look at it, is a polite way of saying, I think you got this wrong. We have piloted with the ATO that fresh eyes separate review mechanism as a trial that's now a permanent feature. So if you think you've got an assessment that's not quite right, you actually can get a fresh eyes review of it from someone else in the tax office. Now, that's one option. But we also offer a tax concierge service where if that escalates to a dispute, we actually get involved. We provide access, affordable access to tax lawyers. If you're thinking of taking a challenge to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, we can reality check whether that's a smart idea. All we ask for off the small business taxpayer is $100. We will fund the rest, and you'll get an hour time with a tax lawyer expert to give you a bit of a reality check about how that's going. And then you may have access to a second hour of support just to tool you up to be able to navigate and understand success prospects at the AAT. And then we also talk directly with the AAT tax division about their experiences and see what we can do to support the process, as well as collaborate with the Inspector General where we think there's something a bit NQR. We might go hunting ourselves. Pivoting back to one of the powers of the office, we can conduct our own inquiries. So we can actually call for evidence. We can probe deeply under the hood of stuff that's going on and surface material and have that freedom to do that. So that's another mechanism that can help with your audience and our interaction with the tax office.
Okay. Fascinating. What about recovery of debts? I mean, there can be from two perspectives. One is from government. It might also be from outside larger organisations and things like that. What's the role you play in that type of field?
Well, normally we get probably 25% of our traffic is around payment times. So you would have seen the payment times reporting framework and some of the policy measures being implemented. They mirror a lot of what's operating in the UK right now. Well, we've been championing that because we track over time with a range of data sets what's happening with payment times. And we see when, 16 of the 18 economic sectors that small business are involved in, they've been blowing out on payment times. And so we surface that. We'll get individual examples. It might often be a dispute over whether a good or a service has been supplied. And some people just say, well, it's not right. And we're going, well, hang on. We probably need a little bit more of a conversation. What's not right? Let's understand the problem. But it seems as though a small business has provided, what it was asked of it, and you're just not paying them. Now, let's see what we can do. We can facilitate some mediation there where we bring the parties together and help them find a solution. Occasionally, we might send a more of a conciliator in to facilitate that conversation who can steer the parties to say, well, that seems a bit rich. Maybe this might be a way forward. And often when these disputes arise, Steve, the parties stop talking to each other. So, we'll get involved in trying to flush out, what a solution, what a settlement might look like, and then urge the parties to play nice. And sometimes that can actually involve the government itself. They might have you might be a supplier to government under a procurement program. There might be something that's not precisely what it needs to be. And then the government department just shuts up shop and you're left wondering when you're going to get paid. We actually do engage with government departments as well. And so, this is supposed to behave as a model litigant. You're supposed to set yourself these small business procurement ambitions. You ain't showing them right now. Let's get involved and nudge that around. So we do a bit of that as well and try and bring the parties together. If it's a pure financing thing, that'll be a warm layoff to AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. Problem is you need to sign on to be an AFCA participant, and that binds you to their processes as is required under Chapter 3 of the Constitution. We'll talk about that another time. But you can't, and they've got an arbitration type process. You can't impose arbitration through a federal mechanism without the consent of the parties. So a finance provider needs to sign on with AFCA and say, I consent. Many don't, though. And we see in equipment financing, linked credit schemes, they seem to be popping up everywhere where people operate on the edge, not part of AFCA. Well, they come to us and we try and facilitate an outcome. And if we see a pattern of things, we might say, hey, there's a policy issue here. Let's check out what that looks like.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, one of the ones that we see quite a lot of that tend to come through our door from time to time is franchises. And I know that you get heavily involved in that, and you've been heavily involved in that by the sounds of it for a long time. Take us through how that might play out as well.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, my interest in franchising dates back 30 years. I'm a great believer in franchising. Done well, it's a great model of entrepreneurship. Where it's not done well and those power imbalances are played to the disadvantage of the franchisee, it can be ugly and not the place you want to be. So we try and make people, realise that franchisee success is the true litmus test of good franchising, and those adult to adult symbiotic relationships are at the heart of good franchising. Sometimes that doesn't happen. When I was a minister, I strengthened the franchising code of conduct, which actually put some bumper rails around how people would interact and really reinforce the full disclosure ethos that sets out how we regulate franchising in Australia. It's a commercial undertaking. It's an investment. put it out there, be clear about what that relationship looks like, what the obligations are, and people can go in eyes open. Well, you and I both know along the way things can change, the relationships can be strained. Some of the arrangements that were thought to be okay when people signed on might look a bit different in reality, or even the model itself might change somewhat. And there's disciplines around how parties to a franchising agreement need to tackle that. When I was there, I strengthened the code, put in a good faith obligation on both parties, and also some penalties for people not doing the right thing. Because if you and I entered into a franchising agreement and someone had stooged us about the disclosure material made available to us, we might be making not an informed decision, not on a reasonable basis, and we might be out, hundreds of thousands of dollars because of it. So there's some penalties in there. The code's been recently upgraded again to pick out things like marketing funds, where you're making a contribution and it's supposed to go into promoting the brand. We've seen some examples where franchisors have actually used the marketing fund to prosecute and sue franchisees. Probably not quite what was in mind when it was, thinking about some Facebook ads or something. You end up with a, billable hours from the franchisor for trying to take you out of the system. So there's that sort of things being strengthened. Also, some are the cooling off arrangements, the provision of really critical material to the franchise relationship. People on the call would know if it was a retail or a QSR franchise arrangement, often the real estate landlord tenancy arrangements are really critical to that. Well, Steve, if you and I signed on and we had no visibility over those tenancy arrangements, we are walking into a dark cave, not knowing what might be required of us. So that needs to be provided. So these are some of the changes that are in the code. Part of it, though, is about dispute mediation, grievance resolution. The code says good franchise systems have good internal systems. Can you surface an issue if you're a franchisee about something the franchisor's done, or vice versa? Is that able to be resolved within the brand, within the system? If it's not, then you can come to us. You can lodge a notice of dispute. And interestingly, Steve, we get that from franchisors and franchisees. We get franchisees saying, hang on, someone's just changed the menu. They've discounted the pizza to a point I'll never make any money. No one talked to me about it. This materially undermines the capacity of my franchisee to be profitable. That's not good faith. Can you get involved? And we'll get involved. Sometimes the franchisor says, hang on, we've been trying to get this franchisee to maintain health standards, food handling standards. They just won't do it. Now, we're probably going to have to, get them, ditch them, terminate the franchise for legal non-compliance, but we just can't get anyone to talk to them. Can you help? So this is the sort of thing we can get involved in. One of the key things, though, Steve, is that in the code, it now allows for arbitration. So if both parties agree, we will facilitate the dispute going off to a qualified arbitrator who will actually make a call. So remember where we started? Mediation, that's us bringing the parties together to see if they can find a solution. Conciliation, that's where we come in and nudge them and say, well, maybe this is an option. That's an option. They've still got to find their own resolution. And then there's arbitration, where the parties agree that someone external, someone independent, someone competent will hear the arguments and make a call. And that's something that's new in that franchising code.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I wouldn't have thought that franchisors would actually come to you, but it makes sense that they actually do.
We've had a few of them. I mean, we've even helped where there's been, culturally diverse business owners not being able to communicate. We've been able to, sometimes the conciliators, they're almost like elders. And sometimes, I don't want to be unkind, sometimes people just need to get their act together and get off their high horses. And we're able to say, look, really, this is vanity now. You're just having an argument because you don't want to back down. Okay, don't back down, but let's find a solution going forward, because you actually want to get back to business. Because, a breakdown in franchising relationships is destroying of value. It's bad for everybody. And so we get in and get involved. And interestingly, the only, there's a residual power that I put in the legislation I now administer. I can actually name and shame parties. So if people just aren't engaging constructively and are being peanuts, You know, I can go to print and say, you know, we've been trying to sort out this dispute. Here's the bones of it, but this business is being a peanut. You know, and you know, we try not to use that very often at all, but we do say to some people, yeah, you can tell us to rack off if you want, but you know, the Parliament said this matters to help energize enterprise in the economy, to give smaller and family businesses a chance when they don't have all the muscle and all the resources to actually, you know, get a reasonable outcome and get back to business. And you know, if we feel people are just really hostile to that pretty simple idea, we do have some tools available to us.
Yeah, I'm sure that could be quite persuasive. So, so I suppose to finish up on, you know, you'll have, your organisation will have resources available. And how do people? What's the best way of communicating with you? I think is probably, you know, that's probably a good note to finish on. I would have thought.
Yeah, look, there's a couple of ways. I mean, always through our website's a great start. I mean, we've got, you know, and who could possibly forget ASBFEO? So it's www.asbfeo, Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman.gov.au. So that's our main entry point. You can always just email me directly too. I'm very low maintenance. So that's bruce.bilson, 2 L's, at asbfeo.gov.au. And I'm sure Ian's on the call. He'll be telling everyone what my email address is. The other thing too is you can come in through the My Business Health website. We operate that as well, where we put resources out there. Like there's a guide there on how to access finance, making sure you're finance ready. Great thing about disintermediation in the finance sector is there's so many options out there. But as you well know, Steve, and many of the people on this call, who's giving people advice about what the best fit of that plethora of new financing options might look like? So there's some tools on our website there, and there's even some stuff around good emotional health. You know, small business owners that are feeling overwhelmed, can't concentrate, can't sleep, finding these times, you know, really challenging on top of the already significant responsibilities business owners and leaders have. Making sure you're okay on your okay day is important for us too. So there's some mental health resources as well as business health resources on that My Business Health website that we run. But yeah, and above all, I'm interested in your ideas. You know, if you've got an aha about something that could be done better, my job is to get rid of needless headwinds, needless obstacles that are standing in the road of enterprising businesses be the best they can be. It's not my gift to make them succeed. That's not my gift. But if I can get rid of some of the lead in the saddlebag and the obstacles and the headwinds, that is my purpose. And I'll know my work's done when Australia's the best place to start, grow and transform a small business. We're not quite there yet, but we keep going.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I think they're great comments. So I'll open up to the audience today. If you've got any questions, just put them in the chat, and we'll get Bruce to answer them for you. And
are you realising I won't be able to see them because I'm on a phone after
that's okay.
NBN said the system would be down for about 7 hours on Monday. Well, it's still down now, so can imagine how chipper we are about that with homeschooling and trying to do our work from home.
Yeah, and given your office as well.
Okay. Well, that's I've got four bits of kit here that I normally use to make sure I can get on whatever platform people need, but they all need a bit of broadband. So a lot of redundant technology sitting around my home office at the moment. So.
All right. Well, it doesn't look like there are any, but look, I think it's fascinating as to what your office actually does and the resource that's actually available to all businesses, really. And look, I thank you very much, Bruce, for taking the time and talking to us today. But also thank everybody as well for attending. It's great to have you with us. Hope you're all okay. And on that note, we're spot on time. Again, Bruce, thanks very much. And thanks, everybody have a really good day. Thank you.
Have a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.